growth and change, as you can see, is pretty extraordinary, and that's what I'm here to learn about and to talk about a bit today. But I just want to start actually by explaining a little bit more about what that means. I'm responsible for the BBC World News television channel, BBC World Service radio services, and for the BBC's online output outside the UK. So that's the website and the mobile services. And what I'm going to talk about is content, really, how we deliver content to audiences in African markets, but starting with a bit of kind of where the BBC's come from and how it's changing to answer the different needs of the audiences here. I want to look at then what we're learning from the African markets in terms of content, the changing behaviour of audiences, and then how the delivery of news is changing. So, first of all, let me take a moment to explain why I think the BBC has sustained its position over the past 8 decades, because I think that tells us a lot more about news more generally. The BBC is, as you know, one of the world's largest news providers, both in terms of audience size and its news gathering operations. And you don't maintain that sort of scale without a firm set of values. And our core mission, stated by Lord Reith, who was the first Director General of the BBC, was that, and it's still emblazoned on our coat of arms actually, is that nation shall speak peace unto nation, which was at its time a lofty, idealistic ambition, but I think it's one that's as relevant today as it was 80 years ago, and I think it's particularly significant for a global news provider. And just as importantly, the BBC's news services have been built, I think, on one core BBC value, and it's one of 6 listed on, here we go, that's my BBC identity pass, and on the back, the first BBC value listed here is trust is the foundation of the BBC. We are independent, impartial and honest. And I think that's trust. It's not something that is gifted to you by audiences, it's been hard-earned and defended. It's importantly something that I think unites our staff. It's our mission in a way. We all know it's at the heart of why we do what we do. And before I discuss this relevance to today's media world, I'm going to show you a 3-minute film which just gives you a bit of a history of the BBC's news reporting, but also gives you some sense of the way in which we're reaching audiences today as it gets towards the end of the film. So if we could just run the first film, please. Not that one, it's the other one.
This is London calling. I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king.
It looks as though they're not going to fire at the moment.
It is a deep personal tragedy.
It was proved that the Chancellor, Mr. Callahan, left his home next door.
There's heavy artillery support for the Americans, and
the Russians are here, the tanks are here, the guns are here.
The first body I saw was that of a youth being carried out by other civilians.
Illustrations of the changes which are sweeping across this continent.
Millions of South Africans danced in a new era of democracy.
It's hard to imagine in our continent and in our time what kind of people could do this.
Buckingham Palace has confirmed the death of Diana, Princess of Wales.
Just before 9 o'clock, the pure blue sky over Manhattan was filled with smoke.
We could hear the explosions of the incoming missiles and the bombs.
There was a real sense of disbelief here about what has happened.
They want to know why the government couldn't have done more and couldn't have done it sooner.
Nobody expected what happened here at 2:30 in the afternoon on Friday. Where is Gaddafi? Gaddafi, nobody who knows.
Without warning, we then came under direct heavy machine gun fire.
She was brought down on a stretcher with cheers from the crowd and the rescue team.
Pull up another email to put to our guest.
The pirates are well equipped. They have sophisticated weapons.
If there's any need of these revolutions, it's the Facebook.
Now you can join our new scenes regular.
scene really about what we do, and to show I think this is an organisation which over, as I say, 80 years has continuously adapted to change. Not by changing our values, but by changing how we apply them, what we apply them to, the technology, the style and tone, our approach adapting to the contemporary environment. We're operating in a market with more noise, more competition and more choice than ever before. But we don't see that as a threat, as an opportunity in fact. In a market with seemingly endless choice, a trusted source of news and information becomes even more essential. And the evidence for that is clear to see from the way the audience behave, not just from the audience numbers we track for things like, I don't know, the tsunami in Japan where we had record audiences, or recently for the death of Gaddafi, but we can also see how people are sharing or quoting our content, and that's really important to us. And these stories are now delivered by a BBC that is more accessible, has a faster paced news production and presentation, has more in-market journalists and presenters, has more experts across the language services, 27 language services in total, delivering insights into the stories that really matter to our audiences across platforms. But it's a BBC that retains its core value of speaking to the world and of being trustworthy, and that's what's kept us where we are today. As I say, values are a starting point, but they need to be backed up by the resources, the skills, the technology to meet the needs of modern audiences. And through a very large investment in our operations, this is something we're more than ready to meet. I just want to show you, just click forward a sec. That's the original BBC headquarters, broadcasting house in central London, and behind it is the new headquarters division for the news operations, which we're moving to next year. And this will enable us, I think, to work in a completely different way with much more use of the multi-platform, multilingual opportunities that you get by bringing people together in one place. So the famous Bush House in London will close, the television centre in West London will close, and all the news operations will move into this brand new building. And what's important about that is that if you take the way our language services work, they won't just be speaking to their own audiences anymore, they'll be speaking to global audiences. And I think that's something, again, that gives us a competitive edge in the market. And I want to talk about some other examples of just things we're doing, I think, to give you a sense of how the BBC relates to audiences. We've created something which we call the BBC Global Video Hub, and it's a central team producing video content in many languages, created by one language service, but then shared among many others. And it allows us to save time, resource, and money, and to expand TV programme brands across languages and different platforms. And I want to show you something which also shows how we're experimenting with styles of production. This is something that we produce in one language, but then version in many others, and it's what we call a data visualization. So if we can just play the second video clip, please, the one you just caught a glimpse of before. It's quite short. It started as an English piece of work, but then each of the language services that were interested translated it into their own format. So if you go to the BBC website or to our one of our smartphone apps, you can see this playing as a sort of piece of background material. And we also run it on the World News TV channel. And as you can see, massively efficient way of working. One journalist created that in a couple of days in English, and then it gets versioned in all of these other languages. So you can see the text is very small, but you've got Arabic, Chinese, Ukrainian, Portuguese, Vietnamese, Russian, Spanish, Somali, and Hausa. So I'll just move on, I won't play all of that, it's a bit long. And I'm sure you're all aware that the BBC has had to make significant savings in recent times. But ideas like this, like the Global Video Hub, enable us to reduce costs while, I think, enhancing our reporting. So that's what we're doing, I think, to reinvent ourselves as a news organisation. But what are we doing specifically for and within Africa? Well, we've built and maintained a very large news gathering operation here across both English and language services. In terms of reach, we estimate a weekly African audience of around 90 million, the majority of whom still access the BBC via radio. And I'll talk a bit more about radio in a moment, but followed by TV and then online, and increasingly mobile. We see our language services as primary local sources of news, a system we use called Systemos. And this allows us to track conversations across the social web to better understand what people think about the BBC. So we look at what's going on Facebook and Twitter and how they're using the BBC and talking about the BBC. And it gives us a really good sense of engagement with our news. And when appropriate, we actually enter the conversation and engage with people directly. And another system we use is called Global Minds, which is an online community of BBC viewers and listeners. And anyone can sign up to this website and give their thoughts and feedback on our output. And we've got about 30,000 people doing so at the moment, a sort of loyal audience that we can go to and ask questions anytime about what they think about the BBC. And I think by understanding the audience, what they're saying about us, their needs, and by being able to look at where they are and how they're behaving, I think it gives us a really good base from which to bring the world to Africa and bring Africa to the rest of the world. And that's not just about news reporting, that's also about creating special programs. So we have a program, Africa Business Report, which is broadcast globally, which looks at the development of business here. Hard Talk, now a program that runs on TV and radio, regularly comes here to do its one-to-one interviews. Topically, we did Julius Malema not too long ago. We did a very good interview with President Bashir of Sudan a couple of months back. You know, the very big sort of top of the agenda stuff we do. And then meanwhile, we've got a program called World Have Your Say, which is an award-winning interactive program which runs across every platform, featuring contributions from audiences and discussions and dialogue. And our experience is that people here in Africa in particular are very prone to take part in these conversations. I think it's something that's specific to the markets here. But these changes I've talked about, they're necessary in the changing market. They're not enough. I think whilst the creation of news is developing very rapidly, the methods by which it's consumed are also beginning to change more rapidly, some of which we've already heard about here. I think audiences are very demanding. They want news when, where, how they like it. We have to do everything. We have to be on TV, radio, online, mobile, tablets, all of those things we're present on at the moment. Very challenging in terms of the spreading of our resources, our investment across all of these, but crucial to be successful. And in particular, I just want to mention mobile, because here we're seeing an enormous growth in the consumption of content on mobile devices, proportionately greater than anywhere else in the world. A very, very large proportion of our mobile traffic comes from within Africa, and especially so for sport, actually. Huge interest in sports coverage. Cost and speed of downloading are still a barrier, more so in some markets than others, but there's also quite a lot of sharing between devices via Bluetooth and what have you, and that's something again that we notice specifically happening here. So that's where we are today. We have, as I say, a fantastic heritage. We're translating the values that underpin that heritage into an organisation with the right resources and the ability to deliver news across all of these formats. Just to finish, I want to talk a little bit about the future, really, where things we see changing. I think we're going to see a great deal more sharing and personalisation of content. I think that trend is very important to notice. And social media in particular is going to play an important part in the future of news, both in terms of generating it, as we've heard about very often, and consuming it. We now have teams dedicated to working on Facebook and Twitter. We've got, as of this morning, about 1.3 million Facebook followers for BBC World News, roughly the same sort of number for our Twitter feeds, and they're becoming key sources of news for audiences everywhere, actually. And there are many examples of stories which have broken first on Twitter. There are examples of stories that have been wrong on Twitter. The stories we tweet, just as the stories we post on Facebook, go through the same editorial checks as any other BBC content. And I believe that audiences respect and understand us even in the new world of speed and complexity. We've got some data which shows that the BBC is the source most used by bloggers to reference news stories. I mean, that's a pretty extraordinary statistic for us. Anywhere in the world, the #1 news source used by bloggers. I think it's clear that online video will be used more widely, though more in short form than in longer form. I think in terms of the way the media industry in Africa is developing, we're going to see more investment in vernacular stations and greater competition from cheaper satellite and digital operators, some of which Chris was discussing. I think on an international level we'll see more new players entering the market, like Al Jazeera Swahili, and an increased emphasis on local programming, so expect more of Africa Business Report and that kind of thing on air. But I don't think we've ever been afraid of competition. I think there's a lot for us to be excited about. We'll continue to build on the quality of our production and presentation. There's always going to be for us a balance between personality-led and content-led news, but I think we can still maintain a distinctive place